Welcome to True Drew Podcast, your source for all things Nancy Drew. I'm your host, Avery, and on this podcast, we'll discuss everything from the Nancy Drew books, to computer games, to movie adaptations, and TV shows. Nothing is off the table. So if you're a True Drew, you'll definitely want to tune in for this podcast. Hey guys, and welcome back to True Drew Podcast, the podcast where we talk about all things Nancy Drew, and today we're going to be jumping into another book. Today's episode is going to be on the book called The Elusive Heiress, and this is book number 68 in the Nancy Drew series, and it was first published in 1982. So some of you might remember, I've mentioned this in a couple of the episodes for the podcast, but when I first came into this huge stack of Nancy Drew books that my dad and I found in an estate sale over a year ago now, I kind of went through the books randomly at one point, and I was reading them based on what covers looked the most interesting to me. And this book, The Elusive Heiress, was one of those books that really caught my eye because, you know, the cover that I have for that book shows Nancy in this Southern Belle sort of get-up is what it looked like to me. She's wearing this cap sleeve dress with lace on it, a feathered hat, and then in the background we see this wagon with these horses going crazy, and there's what looks to be like firecrackers under the horses. So that really caught my attention, and I was like, this looks like kind of an interesting, odd book. Also, the title was kind of interesting, The Elusive Heiress, because Nancy deals with people all the time who have fortunes and inheritances and they're unaware of it. Like, that seems to be a trope in the Nancy Drew books, but I thought, I'll pick this one up and read it. So for this podcast episode, this was actually the second time I've read this book. And I don't know if you guys do this, but there's this strange phenomenon where when I've read a Nancy Drew book before, like as a kid or a few months or years ago, and then I come back to it and reread it, sometimes I like it way more the second time. Sometimes I think it's worse. Sometimes it matches, what I thought of it the first time. So the first time I read this book, I remember being sort of disappointed by it, and I thought it was a little bit of a dud, but you all will have to wait till the end of this episode to see if I liked it better or worse this second time through. So as far as the book covers go for The Elusive Heiress, there were 3 that I was able to find online, and we've already kind of talked about the first one where Nancy looks a bit like a Southern Belle, but surprise, surprise, this book actually takes place in Wyoming, so I wasn't expecting that the first time I read this book. But if you want to see these book covers that I'm talking about in this segment of the podcast episodes, I always post these on my Instagram, True Drew Podcast, on Wednesdays before these episodes come out on Thursday. So the second book cover that I was able to find for this book, I actually have this edition also, and it has the checkerboard under Nancy Drew, and there's a tagline at the top for this one, and it says, "Nancy's latest case takes her back in time to the Old West." And this book cover shows Nancy shining a flashlight through a broken window, and she's got bangs, kind of a blonde ponytail, and she's wearing a vest over like a flannel shirt, and she looks scared, which, I would be too if I was, looking through a broken window into an abandoned cabin like she is. So the third edition of this book cover that I was able to find, I'm assuming this is a UK cover because it says number 62 instead of number 68, and Nancy's got the full Western getup. She's got the blue jeans, flannel shirt, a bandana, and a little cowgirl hat, and she's pumping her arms because she's running away from a bull that's charging her. She actually kind of looks a little bit like Little Debbie in this. Do you guys know what I'm talking about? The little mascot on the little snack cake boxes, Little Debbie, like with the super curly hair and the little hat. Like, Nancy kind of looks like her right here. I'm gonna call that bull fudge round. So I came up with a couple funny cover spoofs, and first I did the book cover where Nancy's looking through the broken window, and I just said, "I told Tommy to stop playing baseball so close to the house." And then the Southern Belle looking book cover, I said Little Nancy on the Prairie, because Nancy looks like she could give Laura Ingalls Wilder a run for her money. So as far as giving these book covers a rating, I would give the first 2 3 magnifying glasses. I would give the last one probably a 1.5 to 2. It's just not my favorite. So now let's go ahead and discuss some of the characters that we see in The Elusive Heiress. So first up we have Lorna Winthrop, and I just put millionaire millionaire in parentheses. That's his identifier. There's Clarinda Winthrop, who is his missing daughter. Tom Matthews, who is Arlo's nephew. Grace Reed, who's an old friend of Nancy's mom. Lorna Buckman and Jennifer Buckman, who is Lorna's daughter. Brewster, who is Grace Reed's dog. He plays a crucial part in this book. Lindy Thorpe. Leroy Catlin. Miss Ferguson, and I just put Parade Lady in parentheses. Eleanor. Fred and Barry Matthews. Joshua Weber, who works at the Chuck Wagon, which is this restaurant, and Bob Westmoreland, who's a friend of Leroy Catlin's. So that's all the characters for this book, but please tell me I'm not the only one that thought that Clarinda Winthrop is such a weird name. It just sounds so strange. I kept wanting to call her Cough Drop, Clarinda Winthrop. Like, it's such a long name, and it doesn't really roll off the tongue. It's a weird name to me. If anyone listening out there happens to have the name Clarinda or Winthrop, I'm not saying you have a weird name. I just think it seems weird together. It's just some of the names they throw together in these books. I'm just like, nobody would be named that, but I guess there's stranger names. So now really quickly, I'll read a synopsis for The Elusive Heiress. 40 years ago, the daughter of millionaire Arlo Winthrop ran away from home to marry a man her family didn't approve of. Now, her ailing father wants to make peace with his daughter, but first, Nancy has to find her. The only clue leads to Cheyenne, Wyoming. On the plane there, Nancy and her boyfriend Ned meet 10-year-old Jennifer Buckman. Jennifer's mother was supposed to meet her daughter at the airport, but never showed up. Now Nancy has 2 missing people to find. As Cheyenne celebrates its heritage with frontier days and a rodeo, all the dangers of the Old West, from a runaway stagecoach to a bucking bull on the loose, threaten to keep Nancy from solving the mysteries. Okay, did you catch that? So this was actually the synopsis from the back of the book, and it says Ned is Nancy's boyfriend. Not her special friend, not just someone she likes to spend time with, her boyfriend. I submit that for the record and let it stand. Now on to a dramatically read newspaper headline synopsis. Yeehaw! Nancy Drew reunites family amidst frontier days. So now let's go ahead and jump into my direct quotes and notes for The Elusive Heiress. So this book starts with Carson having a case for Nancy, and according to him, there's a man named Arlo Winthrop, and he's trying to find his missing daughter, Clarinda. She ran off at the age of 18, and she married a man that he didn't approve of, and she hasn't been seen since. But even stranger than that, Mr. Winthrop didn't report his daughter missing until 30 years later. That is so weird to me. Like, I know you sometimes fight with your family members, but can bygones just be bygones? Like, I think I would be reaching out before 30 years had gone by. I think I couldn't go a few days or even a week without speaking to my family members. I know it's like different for everyone and every situation is different, but I wouldn't be able to do it personally. So Arlo Winthrop, who he is this millionaire, he's had his nephew Tom Matthews assist in the search for Clarinda. So Carson shows Nancy an old picture of Clarinda so she can kind of see what she used to look like, and it might help aid her in finding Clarinda now. And Carson tells Nancy that they'll need to go to Cheyenne, Wyoming, and they'll be able to stay with an old friend of Nancy's mom, and her name is Grace Reed. I thought it was cool that we got a character that had connections and ties to Nancy's mom, because, you know, Nancy's mom passed away when she was 3 years old, is what it says in some of the books. I think they have changed that age at some points, but most of the time Nancy was 3. So she doesn't really remember a lot about her mom, and there's just so much lore there. Like, I wish I knew more about Nancy's mom. So after talking to Carson, Nancy goes on a date to the movies with Ned, and when she gets back home, Carson says he got an anonymous call from someone asking him to come to this place called the Chain Creek Lodge in Canada if he wants to know what happened to Clarinda. This was automatically suspicious to me. I was like, no, Carson, you should not go. But of course, Carson's gonna go. Like father, like daughter. So Carson says he'll go and he'll investigate that lead, and he asks Ned if he can accompany Nancy in his stead, and they will go to Wyoming together, and Ned says he'll go. Good old Ned. So at the airport the next day, Nancy is approached by someone named Miss Peterson who recognizes her, and she's like, oh, you're the famous detective. Like, this happens to Nancy a lot. Like, it's no wonder that later in the cases she starts having to go incognito and like under the radar with an alias, because everybody knows who she is. So Miss Peterson asks Nancy if she cares to accompany a young 10-year-old girl named Jennifer who's going back to Cheyenne to be with her mother. And Nancy says she will, but this is such an awkward situation. Like, I don't know. If someone approached me at the airport and was like, hey, can you watch this kid on this flight and make sure they get to their guardian on the other side wherever you end up to land? I don't know. Like, I wouldn't want that responsibility personally. And it seems like, I don't know, what if this kid's being trafficked or something? I don't want to be held responsible for another human being. Some might call it a simple favor, but sometimes, a small favor turns into a huge problem, or at least that's what happens in the movies. But Nancy Drew, being Nancy Drew, she agrees, and she's like, yeah, I'll sit with her on the plane. So while they're on the plane, Ned plays games with Jennifer, and Nancy reads the case file that Carson gave her. And according to the case file, Clarinda went to Cheyenne after getting married and was last seen staying at a boarding house and working in a dry goods store. So you know how I said sometimes doing a small favor can end up becoming a catastrophe and lots of bad things happen? Well, Jennifer's mom, the child that Nancy is now responsible for, is not at the airport. She's nowhere to be seen. She was supposed to meet Jennifer when she got off the plane, and she's not there. So about this time, Grace Reed, who was Nancy's mom's friend, shows up to pick Nancy and Ned up, and she says Jennifer can come with them after Nancy and Jennifer try to call Lorna Buckman's phone number, but the line has been disconnected, so they can't get in touch with Jennifer's mom. It's just this whole thing. And according to Jennifer, she's been at this boarding school in River Heights since her mom had an accident and sent her off. So she's been in the custody of people like Miss Peterson until she could come back to Cheyenne. So everyone goes back to Miss Reed's house, but as they're leaving the airport, Nancy notices two guys watching Jennifer, which is really creepy. But when they get to Grace Reed's house, Nancy calls Miss Peterson to let her know, hey, we've got Jennifer with us. Her mom wasn't at the airport like you said she was going to be. And when Nancy hangs up, Ned tells her Jennifer wasn't sure her mom would be there. She never talked to her in person. So this is really, really weird. And Miss Reed says she'll call the police and let them know what's going on. But does anyone else find it really alarming that nobody ever spoke to Lorna Buckman? I assume that there was a letter sent. I believe that's what happened in this plot. But it's why? These people were supposed to be responsible for this little girl. And it's just really kind of scary that they were like, okay, we'll just put you on an airplane and send you back to your mom. And that's it. Probably not a good idea. I mean, I don't run a boarding school, but I still know what's up. So Jennifer makes herself at home and she plays with Grace's dog, Brewster, and Nancy and Ned drive to Jennifer's mom's house. They get her address from Jennifer and they see if they can find anything out. And they notice that the grass is really tall and there's a lot of mail in the mailbox, a sure sign that no one has been there in quite some time. But there is a car in the garage. And Ned says Miss Buckman could be renting out her garage, and that seems like such a weird concept to me, but okay. I mean, I've heard of people renting out their yards for dogs and strange things. I had that business pop up on Facebook the other day and I was like, okay. But renting out your garage, I guess anything's possible. The 80s must have been quite a different time. So Nancy and Ned go around and talk to the neighbors and ask them if they've seen anything suspicious, but only one person has seen Lorna, and it was earlier in the week before she disappeared. So Nancy leaves her phone number with that woman in case she should show up again, and as she and Ned are leaving the house, she notices a blue car that has driven by them slowly several times. So we can safely assume that somebody followed Nancy and Ned to Lorna Buckman's house. So the next day, Nancy and Ned take Jennifer to this parade, and she waves to some kids, and she mentions that she knows them from a pony club that she was a member of before she went to River Heights. And Nancy says they'll try and contact some of the kids' parents to see if they know what happened to Miss Buckman. And about that time, a man shoves Nancy into the street and into the path of a horse. But luckily, Ned pulls her out of the way just in time. I know a lot of times we see Nancy getting into boating accidents or car accidents. This book, it's primarily horse-related accidents, so prepare yourself. So right after Ned pulls Nancy out of the path of danger, she hears a scream, and she sees that Jennifer is being abducted and about to be put in a blue car, like the one she and Ned saw yesterday around Jennifer's house. So this is horrifying. Jennifer's screaming, and she kicks the man who drops her. So Nancy takes note of the license plate plate as the car races off and she grabs Jennifer. And Nancy also realizes that she saw the same two men at the airport watching Jennifer. So they've been following them this entire time, which is really, really creepy. So as Nancy and Ned are consoling Jennifer, she says that one of the men told her that he was going to take her to her mom. I think it's safe to say that Jennifer has been lured to Cheyenne for some other purpose, but what? So when Nancy and Ned get back to Grace Reed's house, Grace tells Nancy she's made an appointment for them to see this man named Joshua Weber. And he works at this place called the Chuck Wagon Breakfast. It's this local institution in Cheyenne, and he may have some information on Clarinda Winthrop. So later that night, Nancy waits for a call from her dad because he was supposed to update her and let her know when he made it to the lodge in Canada, but he doesn't call, which worries her. So Nancy calls information and she gets the phone number for the lodge that Carson was supposed to be going to after talking to Hannah and hearing that she hasn't heard from Carson either. So Nancy gets connected to the lodge and she talks to a rude man who eventually goes and finds Carson. And Carson just sounds not like himself. He says he's sorry he forgot to call, he's been working on the case, and he'll call Nancy again in a few days. So Nancy tells Ned her dad sounded odd, and my money is on kidnapping. At this point in the book, I was like, I think Carson has been kidnapped and he's being held hostage. Granted, I've read this book twice, but I really couldn't remember the plot, but I was like, this just seems a little bit like The Hidden Staircase and other instances where Carson has been held against his will. So Nancy, Grace, Jennifer, and Ned go to watch some bull and bronco riding the next day, and we get to see rodeo clowns, which is really fun, and Nancy is impressed when one cowboy stays on a particularly tricky bronco and its name is Death Chant. Can you imagine being in a rodeo, like riding, and someone's like, oh, okay, you're going to be riding Death Chant today? Like, I can't even imagine riding in a rodeo, honestly. Like, I'm lucky to stay on a bike. So after they watch all the rodeo events, everyone goes back home, and when they pull in the driveway, Grace notices that the drapes are open, but she specifically remembers closing them. So the doors unlock to the house, and nothing seems to be disturbed, but Nancy feels as if someone was in her room. And Brewster the dog is gone. Luckily, though, he's not missing for long. He comes barking to the front door, and Nancy finds a note on his collar that says, Nancy Drew, this time we took the dog. Next time the victim could be you or one of your friends. Get out of Cheyenne now and leave Jennifer to us. If you stay, someone is going to get hurt. So Nancy reports the threat to the police, which she should, and they're not much help. So Nancy calls Hannah to talk to her, and she says that Mr. Matthews, Mr. Winthrop's nephew, called, and Mr. Winthrop is doing much worse. He's been very sick, and that's why he's been wanting to reconnect with his daughter, Clarinda, and it's making this even more urgent that they have to find her. So now Nancy's looking for two missing people. She's looking for Clarinda Winthrop and Lorna Buckman, so as if one person wasn't hard enough. So it's at this point that Nancy goes to meet Mr. Joshua Weber down at the Chuck Wagon place, and she shows him the picture of Clarinda Winthrop to see if he knew her, and he says he did, but he knew her as another name, Lindy Thorpe, and she was married to someone named Leroy Catlin. So Grace is sitting there talking with them, and she says there was a scandal with them 30 years ago where they were accused of robbing a bank, and checks and money were found on the Catlin property, and they left a few days later, never to be heard from again. So Nancy kind of files all this information away, and she calls to talk to her dad again at the lodge in Canada, and the same rude man answers, and he says Carson checked out and didn't say where he was going. So Nancy is really, really worried about him now. She does not believe this at all. She thinks that he's still up there somewhere. So remember how I was talking about how Nancy was wearing this turn of the century, kind of like 1800s looking outfit on one of the book covers? So this is a scene from the book. She gets to dress up in this outfit and ride in a stagecoach in this parade that's going on for Frontier Days, and Ned and Jennifer get to ride horses in the parade. So they're all really excited about getting to be a part of this parade, but while they're riding along in the procession, two men run towards the stagecoach that Nancy's in. One flings the door open and another throws firecrackers under the horses' feet, causing them to go rogue and run towards a crowd. So this stagecoach is going off the rails with Nancy inside. But Ned heroically saves the day by helping grab the reins of the stagecoach horses, saving Nancy and these two other older women inside. And one of them is this lady named Miss Ferguson. She's the one that I said when I was listing off the cast of characters, I was just like, parade lady, because she literally doesn't factor into the book at any other point. She just let Nancy be in the parade. That's it. So Nancy talks to the police after this incident and Sergeant Dave Hill, and she gives descriptions of the two men who sabotaged the stagecoach. And the sergeant tells Nancy he's found no evidence that Jennifer's mom was the one who called to have Jennifer come back to Wyoming in the first place. So yeah, it's starting to seem like someone else has orchestrated all this stuff behind the scenes. So later that same night, Nancy, Ned, and Jennifer go to watch the chuck wagon races and ride fair rides, and while Ned and Jennifer are riding this big Ferris wheel, Nancy spots one of the bad men watching the Ferris wheel from the shadows. So those two guys who threw the firecrackers under the horses' feet, the ones that tried to abduct Jennifer a few days ago, they're still around. So Nancy follows this guy from a distance, but then a female voice lures her behind a tent where she gets hit over the head and is told to leave Wyoming. When Nancy finally comes to, she finds Ned leaning over her, so they go and report this incident to the police as well. Now, the next day, Nancy and Grace talk, and she says there's some good news. According to this guy named Bob Westmoreland, most of the Catlin's things were left on their ranch after they left when they had all those accusations that they had robbed that bank. And he says maybe there's a clue to Clarinda Winthrop's disappearance there. So, on this day, Nancy and Ned also take Jennifer to her mother's house looking for clues on her disappearance because we're working on these cases of these missing persons in tandem. And while Jennifer's there, she remembers where a spare key is and they're able to get in the house. So Nancy finds proof that Lorna didn't call the academy to send Jennifer home yet because there's an unfinished letter talking about it. So she didn't do it. It's almost as if she left in the middle of doing something. Maybe she was kidnapped. It's funny, too, because as they're searching for clues, Ned talks about the villains, and he calls them Mustache and Company because one of the men, like, that's his identifier. He has this big, like, almost like handlebar mustache. So Nancy, Ned, and Grace next go to meet Bob Westmoreland at the Catlin's property, which is really run down after being abandoned for, 30 years. But they learn a lot while they're there. The Catlins had a baby, according to him, and he had seen maps of California in their car. So could that be where they went? So everyone looks around the ranch, and Nancy accidentally trips in one room, and she loosens a baseboard when she falls against it, and there's this false panel, which she finds a diary behind. So she wonders if it could be Lindy Thorpe / Clarinda Winthrop's. So she looks at it a little bit closer, and it does turn out to be Clarinda's diary, and she uses a lot of initials and abbreviations in her writing, which is confusing to Nancy. She mentions a P and D in LA. So after this discovery, Nancy calls Hannah again, and she still hasn't heard from Carson. So Nancy talks to Chief McGinnis back in River Heights, and he says he'll work with Canadian authorities to try and find Carson. Now, the next day, Nancy, Ned, and Grace go to watch Jennifer and the Pony Club perform in the rodeo. And there's this little boy who approaches Nancy while they're watching her, and he asks if she's Nancy Drew, and he gives her a note and disappears. And it's one of Nancy's dad's business cards, and on it says, "Come to the bull corral at once, alone." So of course Nancy does. She goes alone, and she sees the mustache man. So this is one of the guys who tried to abduct Jennifer. He's a bad guy. So she starts towards him when someone screams a warning, and Nancy turns and sees a bull charging straight for her. But this is even worse. The mustached man actually taunts Nancy from across the bullpen and says, "Run, Nancy Drew, run." So Nancy drops to the ground and rolls out from under the pen's fence to safety, barely missing the bull. So some cowboys come over to help. They lock the bull in the bullpen, but by that point, Mustache Man has disappeared, and the two cowboys are named Les and Slim, and they applaud Nancy's quick thinking in dodging Old 79, which is the name of the bull. But the scariest thing is that someone had Carson Drew's business card, so they've been in contact with him since he's been kidnapped, most likely. So was it the mustache man? Is it someone working with him? Someone knows where Nancy's dad is. And the fact that they used that to lure Nancy to her possible death in this bullpen is really, really messed up. So later that night, Nancy and Ned go square dancing, and Jennifer and Grace decide that they're going to tag along. And Nancy's already told them all how she wants to set a trap for the bad men, Mustache and Company, who have been following their every move. And while Nancy's there at the square dance, she also talks to Mr. Westmoreland, and she asks him about the P and D in the diary, and he says it could have been Pete and Diane who lived in a cabin on the Catlin Ranch property for about a year. I know it's Pete and Diane and not Jack and Diane, but I couldn't help but think about Jack and Diane sitting outside the Tasty Freeze. But anyways, about that time, Nancy hears Grace screaming, and she sees that she's been knocked down, and she says it was two men and they took Jennifer. So Ned runs to get the car, and Nancy hides near the parking lot exit to see what kind of car the men are in. And when they go by, she sees Jennifer in the back seat, and it's a light-colored car, so she catches the license plate number before jumping in the car with Ned to chase them. And they follow the car for several miles, and it ends up going to the Catlin Ranch, the abandoned ranch that they looked through earlier. So Nancy wonders if the men are taking Jennifer to the cabin that Mr. Westmoreland told her about. So Nancy and Ned hide the car and wait for the men to leave before investigating. And once they're gone, they go up to this cabin and they find Jennifer and her mom, Lorna, who's been held there for several days. So they bust them out of the cabin, and Lorna explains that a woman came to her house asking a lot of questions, and she just thought it was an insurance person because of her accident. But the woman turned out to be someone named Eleanor, and the two men are Barry and Fred Matthews. And when Lorna had asked them why they were holding her hostage, she has no money, they just laughed at her. And then Lorna also makes the comment that she knew where she was because her Uncle Pete and Aunt Diane used to live in this same cabin. And so Nancy figures out that Lorna is Clarinda Winthrop's daughter, and Fred and Barry Matthews are her cousins, and they've been trying to prevent them from being found so they can inherit the whole inheritance for themselves. So Nancy and Ned drive Lorna and Jennifer back to Grace's and sneak them through the garage, and Mr. Westmoreland is there, and they all talk. And they end up calling Clarinda, and they get her up to speed. She's been living in California under an alias this whole time. And she says she tried to contact her father years ago, but she got a letter back saying he didn't want anything to do with her, but it was typewritten, which she thought was odd at the time. So Fred and Barry were taking care of Arlo Winthrop at that time, and Nancy speculates that they sent that. And Grace also tells Nancy that Hannah called again for her, but it's so late, Nancy says she'll just call her in the morning. So when Nancy finally talks to Hannah, she reads a letter that Carson sent saying he's done in Canada and Clarinda Winthrop is dead. But Nancy's like, well, I just met Clarinda, so that's very much not true. But Hannah says she talked to Chief McGinnis, who says that Chain Creek Lodge, where Carson has supposedly been staying, has been closed for years. So Nancy's already wrapped up these missing person cases. She found Lorna Buckman, she found Clarinda Winthrop, and she's fed up with this. She's like, I'm going up to Canada right now to investigate. So she rents a car, and she finds out that her father's rental car hasn't even been turned back in. So the alarm bells are just going off in her head. So when Nancy finally makes it to the lodge, she sees her father laying in a lounge chair, drugged and being held hostage by a man. And Carson is just out of it. Like, whatever he's on, he's not thinking very clearly. So Nancy signals to her dad to be quiet, and he's apparently, at least conscious enough to do that. He lights up when he sees Nancy. But then Nancy sets fire to this nearby shed with some matches to cause a distraction. And then she bangs on the lodge door yelling, "Fire!" And while the man is trying to put the fire out, she and Carson get away. And Carson tells Nancy that the man held him at gunpoint when he first got to the lodge, which is why he couldn't get away. And later, the Matthews admit that they were behind this plot too. And that is the end of our mystery. So now let's go on to a little segment that I like to call What's Cooking. So in this book, we saw mentionings of lemonade and cookies, milk and brownies, soda, flapjacks and ham, eggs, bacon, and French toast, and waffles and sausage. There was a lot of breakfast food. Now for the things that I think Nancy could add to her resume. So for this book, I said Nancy could consider herself an airline companion. She accompanied Jennifer into another state, and luckily that turned out better than I thought it was going to. Nancy could consider herself a rodeo clown because she did get away from that bull, and she's also an arsonist. She set that shed on fire to save her dad. And Navy SEAL / Black Op because, driving up to Canada to get Carson away from this guy that was holding him hostage, that took a lot of guts. Now, as far as the things I liked and didn't like about the Elusive Heiress, I loved the rodeo setting. I thought that was kind of cool, but I didn't like that I still don't really get why Clarinda had to change her name. I mean, yeah, they were accused of bank robbery, but that's kind of a weak plot point in my opinion, and I don't know, I wasn't very fond of this book, to be honest. So yeah, I would still probably say that this book on the second reading is still not one of my favorites. I would give it a 2.5 magnifying glasses, and I'm giving it the 0.5 because Nancy saved Carson in a really cool way. That was awesome. That was probably my favorite part of the book. So that concludes today's episode. I hope you guys enjoyed it. As always, thank you so much for listening, and thank you so much for leaving reviews on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. I really appreciate that. And for next week's episode, we're going to be talking about another book, The Clue in the Ancient Disguise. So if you like forbidden romances and armor, like knights in shining armor that come to life, then you're definitely going to like this one. Until next time. Thank you for listening to this episode of True Drew Podcast. Can't get enough of the podcast? Then check out my subscription series, True Drew Files, available on Apple and Spotify. For Nancy Drew books and merchandise, you can check out my website, www.truedrewpodcast.com. For business inquiries, you can contact me at truedrewpodcast@gmail.com, or you can connect with me on Instagram at True Drew Podcast.